I'd like to welcome you all tonight to the first Distinguished Educational Thinkers talk of this year. This series is a series that's sort of co-hosted by the UC Davis School of Education and our Dean, Harold Levine, the Graduate Group in Education, and I'm Cindy Passmore, I'm the chair of the Graduate Group, and the School of Education Alumni Annual Fund. All contribute to bring great thinkers in education to our audience here, and I just want to acknowledge tonight that we have a great group of folks that includes some practicing teachers from some of our projects and graduate students and folks from the School of Ed and beyond. So we're really pleased to have a nice audience to hear Professor Agneti talk today, and I'm going to introduce Tobin White, who's an associate professor in the School of Education, to give us a more formal introduction. So, thank you.
Well, it's a great pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker because, Dr. Noel Agneti earned his BS in Cognitive Science from UC San Diego and his MA and PhD in Education from UC Berkeley. He's been a faculty member in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA since 2000 and the Director of Research at the UCLA Lab School since 2006. So Dr. Agneti's research addresses how people learn through social interaction and instructional conversations, really along three axes. First, by identifying the elements of a classroom discourse and culture that lead to effective learning. Second, by designing and studying external representations, graphs, diagrams, and maps that spark, support, and anchor productive learning conversations. And third, by investigating the connections between academic discourse and everyday discourse to create more effective and engaging learning opportunities for urban students from non-dominant cultural groups and linguistic minorities. So many of these investigations are conducted in the context of learning environments that feature innovative uses of technology to initiate and sustain productive classroom conversations. And these projects have been supported through several grants from the National Science Foundation. The two most recent awards both utilize motion tracking technology to enhance learning. And the first, which I believe we'll be hearing more about in a moment, seeks to illustrate principles of physics by allowing students to use pretend play to depict the effects of force. The second newly funded project is meant to build a sense of civic engagement by having students create digital interactive murals that artistically convey urban planning issues that are facing students' own neighborhoods. So in addition to support from NSF, Noel's scholarship has also been recognized through several honors, such as Spencer Dissertation Fellowship, 2 awards for outstanding research in teaching and learning at UCLA, and NAE Spencer Postdoc Fellowship in 2005, and the AERA Division C Jan Hawkins Award for early career contributions to humanistic research and scholarship and learning technologies in 2006. So on a personal note, Noel is one of the scholars that I have really looked up to most and been most influenced by throughout my own early career development. He's a skilled writer, he's a deeply careful analytic thinker, and he's a highly creative design researcher with an abiding commitment to enriching educational environments and experiences for all learners. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Noel Agneti.
So thank you, Tobin, Cindy, Harold, and all of you for having me on your first one of these talks this year. This is my self-indulgent, this is my son pretending to be a coach. I thought it was nice since it was just the Super Bowl 49er and envisioning getting the Lombardi trophy as a 49er. So, and I put that up just as a placeholder, but I am here to talk to you about play, and specifically pretend play and sociodramatic play, and also about how we can think about designing and using emerging types of technologies, and specifically augmented reality, in productive ways in early childhood education. And projects like these require lots of collaborators, and so I wanted to take just a second to thank Joshua Danish from Indiana University, who did a lot of this design work with me, Jeff Burke and Fabian Wagmeister, who are in the film and TV department at UCLA and my co-PIs on these projects. And they're really been pushing the boundaries of how to do these motion tracking on the hardware side of things. Gurley Delacruz, who spearheaded the assessments we used in designing those and trying to design assessments for first graders is not always the easiest thing. Melissa Kumar, who spearheaded working with the teacher, and of course, Sylvia Gentili was the lead teacher of the team of teachers we worked with at the UCLA Lab School. And so today I want to talk a little bit about play without thinking too much about technology. And then I want to illustrate how we can use play as a framework to think about the design of augmented reality and illustrate it with this work we did about 6 years ago. We have a current grant, as Tobin said, to take this and redesign this work we did in physics to extend it and make it a platform for thinking about science instruction more generally with young children and think about it in terms of biological ecosystems and in states of matter and other types of science contexts. So we're thinking about how to expand these ideas and redesigning the technologies and updating the technologies at the same time. And of course, you have to support acknowledge the support that NSF has given to us. And we'll end, in the end, I'll get a little deeper into thinking and trying to explore with you how we think learning is actually happening and the value that the technology is adding to pretend play and to the kids' scientific inquiry. So in the media today, you might hear things like play is under attack in schools and that they're reducing the recess and they're pushing down they're pushing academics younger and younger and things like that. And those same people might cite the fact that play is in fact a civil right for children, and it's recognized as such in terms of our own government and the fact that they require access for all children to public parks. And internationally, there are laws that guarantee the right for children to take break to play. So play has been recognized as a civil right for young children, and yet school itself is not particularly playful, right? School has looked like this for quite some time. And even as we get away from kids sitting in rows and move towards things like circle times and collaborative desks, kids still spend, even in young early childhood education, a lot of time sitting down, listening to the teacher and being still, right? And that's still an important skill that young children struggle with in elementary school. And I think it leads to images and attitudes towards schooling that are reflected in these images of popular media about what school is. So my idea, and what I'm arguing for here, is not to advocate for more recess or for sociodramatic play areas in the classroom. I'm for all those things, but what I'm trying to explore in my work is a way to make school more playful, to make, and I used to say things like put play to work, or to leverage play to support academic pursuits. But I think that's the wrong flavor, and I'm thinking more about in terms of how do you collaborate with the leading activity of childhood, which is play, and align schooling to take advantage of that competency and that excitement, that activity that kids are really excited about. So here is a historical picture, and pretend play has been known for a long time in cognitive development, in developmental circles, to have all sorts of advantageous aspects to it. This is a child playing with a doll, and here they're playing at perhaps the work that their parents do, or work that they've seen. And so in cognitive development, we know that play is associated with the development of the semiotic function, the ability for us to choose one thing to represent another thing. It's also been related with social emotional development in terms of the way in which people work together. Children regulate their own behavior and negotiate and learn to play with others. So there are a lot of aspects to play that have been known to be valuable, and that we're trying to use that and think about that as a way to think about how we can design these technologies. So I want to talk just briefly about augmented reality, because not everybody's familiar with this new technology. So augmented reality is it takes a view of reality, usually through your camera, and it superimposes some sort of information on top of that reality. And there's two types of augmented reality you can think about. There's what they call place-based augmented reality, which you take a view from your camera, and it looks at the GPS in your phone and says you're at Lake Helen, Florida, and it can superimpose some information about Lake Helen, Florida, on that phone. And so your view of the lake is augmented by some additional information that the phone provides you. There's another version of augmented reality called vision-based augmented reality, and this is the type of work I do. This is the first encounter I had with vision-based augmented reality. And so here is an iPad app that lets you take the video feed off your camera and orient your face to it and allow you to try on different clothes. And as you move your body, the images that you've chosen, the animations and images move with you, right? And so that's an example. It's a toy, but it's an example of what vision-based augmented reality is. So I want to take technology and put it up on a peg for a minute and go back to talking about play. And so I'll come back to technology in a bit, but we're going to leave technology behind for a little bit and just talk about play. And to start that, I think we need to talk about what I mean by play and what you mean by play. So I think if you asked people around this room, if you asked 10 different people in this room what play is, you'd get about 12 different answers. Play is fun, play is purposeless, play is for kids. And so I want to be very specific about the starting place for me as to what defines play. And I start with Bateson, because he's one of the most brilliant minds that I've ever read. And he was making some observations in a San Francisco zoo back in 1950s. And he was watching some monkeys play fight. And he came to the realization that play is an orientation towards your own activity, right? What he called a meta-communicative stance, where you say, this is play. And his quote was, when he watched these monkeys, with the playful nip denotes the bite, but it does not denote what would be denoted by the bite, right? So you still might bite your friend, or a playful hit if we were playing and fighting, right? But the punch doesn't mean what a punch normally would mean, right? And so there's an orientation towards your activity. So if you compare these two pictures, I don't know if you can see it, you can probably tell which is the playful bear fight and the real bear fight, right? It's a marked activity. This polar bear doesn't have his claws extended. His fangs aren't extended in the same way. It's a marked activity, and even animals mark their activity, so people they know that the meaning of that fight is not quite the same. So why is that orientation towards your own activity important, right? And so scholars of creativity will say that taking that stance, taking that orientation towards your own activity leads you, a playful attitude leads you to generate more solutions, and sometimes solutions that are out of the box, right? So there's this classic experiment with how many exercise with how many uses of a paperclip can you think of, right? And they'd say, if you take the right stance towards it, you'll start to think about earrings, or you can start to unpack, do a lockpick set, or make a bookmark, a keychain, or a money clip. So that orientation has some important effects on the types of things you might do and think. And so I want to show you one more exercise, a creativity exercise. And so actually, if anybody has a pen and paper, I'd actually like to do this one with you really quickly. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen, I should have brought them with me to tape them to the seats or something. But if you could draw this shape on a piece of paper. And what I want to do is then give you, as soon as you got the paper out, I want you to start with this shape and make a picture out of this shape. And I'll give you about 30 seconds to make that picture. So take this shape, draw it, and use that as the start of a picture. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to quickly draw a picture. All right, time's up, pencils down. So now what I would love you to do is to take that picture and show it to your neighbor. Now, don't be shy. So here's one from, I believe, the original study that I found on the internet that somebody did. Maybe they had a little more time than you. And to be fair, here is my one that I drew. It's a kind of a cop-out because I went abstract with it. So the point that I wanted to make with this was, and in fact, me saying that that's a cop-out is kind of a nice lead into it, right? So the embarrassment, the nervous laughter, the reluctance to share your idea with somebody that you might have experienced when you had to show that to a neighbor stems from the fact that we might feel that our picture is going to be inadequate or somehow we've done it wrong, right? And so what I like about pretend play is that there's no wrong answers in pretend play, right? You can climb on the furniture and get stuck inside the laundry basket and pretend it's a spaceship. You can make soup out of rocks. You can experiment and take chances and explore things. And it's a safe place to do those things. There are no wrong answers, and you don't have to be reluctant to share your ideas with other people. And that's sort of the attitude we want kids to take towards learning activities in early childhood education. Now, I'm going to contradict myself just a little bit, because I said there's no wrong answers in pretend play, but there are rules to pretend play, right? So think about kids playing house. Right? They have to take on the character of a mother or a father, and they have to self-regulate their own behavior by the rules that they understand for parents and fathers, right? Now, there's no wrong answers per se, because you can always renegotiate the rules, right? You can give your mother superpowers and do all sorts of things, right? You're not limited, but there are rules that you have to abide by in play. And so this cartoon sort of illustrates that in the sense, another point, that they are playing out familiar contexts, right? They're playing parenting, right? They're playing a familiar context, but it's a context that they don't fully understand. They don't necessarily understand why mommy has to go to work every day or why the gender roles are sort of set up the way they are. And so that makes play a form of inquiry, right? Because they're inquiring into a situation that they don't fully understand. But through their pretend play, they're trying to figure it out and trying to work it out. And I'll give you a real example rather than just a cartoon example. At the lab school where I do a lot of my work, kids have just started to play researcher. And so they will grab a clipboard and they will pull their friends out of whatever they're doing at recess and give them an activity to do and ask them a bunch of questions about what they're doing. And they're sure to remind their research subject, just like we do, that there are no right or wrong answers and they just want to know how they think, right? So obviously, we've been doing a lot of that and they've been trying to figure out what we're doing at the lab school. And they're working through that, right? That combination of rules and inquiry, I think, makes pretend play also a intuitive form of scientific modeling, or a good bridge towards scientific models. So if you're going to model a science topic like Newtonian force and motion, you do so by specifying a bunch of relationships and a bunch of rules that govern what happens to those objects and those relationships under into certain situations, right? So if you think of Newton's laws of motion, one is object in motion stays in motion unless it's acted upon by another force, right? And so we think pretend play in the same way, playing mommy, playing parenting, playing house, has that same sort of quality. You have to specify the rules that mother would act upon when her child is sick, right? So I just want to make one more note about play, and another reason why we thought it was a good place to start with our designs is that a curious fact about play is that kids spend more time in pretend play negotiating the rules than they do actually in character acting them out. And that social interaction, sharing ideas, and negotiating, those ideas and is a form of reflection on those rules, and it's the type of activity, the social activity and reflective activity that we really want to engage them in science. So for all those reasons, we wanted to engage kids in pretend play as a form of scientific modeling and to use pretend play as a way to engage kids deeply with the concepts of science. Now, having done this for a while, the type of pretend play that we wanted to engage kids in, after working and analyzing what we've done and some of the things we've done wrong, we sort of narrowed it down to the best way we can describe it is improv, right? And so if you've ever watched Whose Line Is It Anyway, you know a little bit about improv, and it's constrained play. There's constraints on the play. They give you the context or some sort of prop that you have to work into your play. And sometimes they will change things halfway through, saying you have to do this now in the style of a kung fu movie. And so those constraints onto play are the types of things that we think give teachers and us leverage to take pretend play and to direct it, engage with kids as play partners and direct that play towards understanding the science in normative ways and not floundering and not learning the sort of normative view of these systems we want them to learn. Because I'm really interested in doing things in classroom, and I'm ultimately interested in them in learning the science as well. So in our design, now it's time to take technology off the peg. In our designs, we're using augmented reality to be the way in which we provide some of those constraints to children's play and introduce those constraints. So instead of the iPad small screen, we use large public displays that the kid, and this is an artist rendering of what we're working on now, but the idea is basically the same. So the children motion is tracked by some sort of camera system that can keep track of where they are, their orientation, and superimpose over that video feed, much like that magic mirror application, some sort of symbol system and simulation over the top of it. So they can pretend to be a ball being given a small push, walking across the room until they get to another force going in the opposite direction. And they can use their body to work out that situation and make an embodied prediction about what's going to happen in that situation. So we think augmented reality is a really interesting type of technology to explore for early childhood education, but we've already seen it being used in all sorts of ways, some of them more thoughtful than others. And so we're really looking to figure out ways that are theoretically rich and sound that can direct and sort of focus the design of these types of technologies so that they're not used in incoherent and sort of just happenstance ways. It's not enough just to have a cool idea, but you have to think about a coherent way that this all fits together in the classroom to work. So I want to show you now a little bit about what this looks like. And then we'll go into a second case where we can go a little deeper into how I think learning is happening here. So here we see kids engaged in pretend play. You'll see these funny hats that they're wearing. This was 6 years ago before the Kinect came out, and so we put giant QR codes on their heads and had force cameras in the ceiling, and that's how we could keep track of where they were. Now, when we're redesigning this, we're using cameras much like the Kinect. They're very inexpensive, and we're trying to keep track of that. So we're redesigning this technology. We won't need the clumsy hats, but we did. So here's a little bit about what this looks like. So as they move across the space, there were 4 cameras in the ceiling, could keep track of her motion, orientation, height, and motion in real time. Here's the sort of back end of it, so you can see that there are some markers on the floor as well that might be forces and things like that. And it acts like a puppet show in one mode. So as she moves across she's pretending to be the ball, and you can see the ball following her motion across the screen. In that mode, let me pause it for a second. in that mode, it's like a puppet show. They are in complete control of the physics. It's not constrained by reality or by a physics engine. But then we can take that situation that's laid out on the floor and through their body and let a physics engine take over, and they can then see what the physics engine might do in that same situation. So it's a sort of seamless transition back and forth between pretend play, where they're in control of the rules, and comparing that to the rules that a physics engine says might happen. So now that I've told you a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish with that technology, let's look a little bit at actually what happened. So we did a 15-week unit on force and motion with first and second graders at the UCLA Lab School. And we went deeply into a number of different subtopics of force and motion. And I haven't mentioned this yet, so let me emphasize it here. We weren't using augmented reality to replace the other types of learnings going on. Kids were still engaged in hands-on experimentation. They were still expressing and drawing their ideas through art, through clay, through tissue sculptures. They were having discussions. So the augmented reality was supposed to enhance their learning and add a new dimension. So we worked with, there's a team teach multi-age classroom at the lab school. So it was about 43 kids and 3 teachers of first and second graders, evenly split between girls and boys. And we had collected 2 types of data. We collected interviews with the kids before and after the curriculum to see what they learned and what they knew, and we collected video case studies to see how they were learning in the moment and to get some process data. So we did indeed see significant changes in terms of what they learned from pre to post. And we were happy to see that the post-test scores and the pre-test scores were not correlated with age. This unit was as good for our younger kids as it was for the older kids, and not with gender, which was something we went in worried a little bit about, right? So if you think about physics, computers, and running around the classroom, a sort of folk theory of elementary or childhood education would say that you're hitting boys on all 4 cylinders. So we were happy to see that that was not the case, and that, in fact, some of the girls were the most articulate at engaging in these things and expressing the rules that were going on, and were quite adept at negotiating the rules. And here's an example of a type of question. I want to use this question to set up the first look at how one of these activities actually played out. So a quick pop quiz. If a ball or a puck is in motion this way and it's given a hit at 90 degrees at approximately the same size force, what direction is that ball going to be going at now? On a frictionless surface, of course. And I won't actually make you commit to handing in these answers. One answer is in the direction that last hit was. Another direction is at a 45-degree angle. And then there's different versions of curves that it might arc off into. And the answer is B. It goes off. It preserves the inertia of the initial hit and adds to it the force of the second hit. You combine those in a sort of vector addition way, and you get B. So we're going to take a look at a case study, and I'll show you 2 kids' activity. The reason we chose this group to look at was that 8 kids in this group got this answer right on the post-test of the question I just saw you. Everybody got it. But up until the point they played with the augmented reality, their ideas about this were pretty unstable and incomplete. So we started them off with this poking the soccer ball activity, where they'd roll a soccer ball down the track, and then they would poke it at 90 degrees with a paper towel roll, and they would be doing this classic sort of hands-on experiment about where did it go, what angle did it do. They did, up here, they did some experiments with a just sort of classic physics engine and tried to work out what was happening, and then they did this augmented reality exercise that we wanted to do. And so the case that will be seen is them modeling this with a force of 2, or a medium-sized force going up, and a force of 3 at 90 degrees. What's the angle of the ball going to take after that? And you see that kids are making different predictions there. So after the soccer ball activity, the poking the soccer ball activity, they had a really hard time. The ball was indeed going off at a diagonal angle, but they were not seeing it and not recording it properly. So they're having a hard time. So when they got to the standard computer simulation, they were able then to finally see that it went off in a diagonal, but they were unable to come up with any way to figure out what that angle was going to be. All right? And so after this augmented reality, they start to figure this out. So what we did is we took painter's tape and we made their rug in the carpet a big giant piece of graph paper. And Sarah, and they took yarn and they made their predictions with yarn. And so Sarah laid down her prediction and then did this really animated walk, got into the character of the ball and walked the path of the ball to make her prediction. David was interesting as well. He got into the character of the ball and he walked from the first force to the second force, and then he steps out of that and he looks back and he does this tracing and kind of does this arc, and then he steps back into character and runs off in the direction to make his prediction, and then has kids lay down the yarn where he ran. Just a couple of ways that they were using their bodies to kind of think through this problem in the more puppet show version, and then this is what happens when they're comparing their predictions inscribed by the yarn to the computer. So I just want to point out a couple quick things about that clip. The computer simulation generates a lot of excitement and a lot of discussion and refinement. There's some careful observations going on. They're figuring out whether or not it was in the exact angle or whether it was displaced from that original line. They're using their bodies. They're walking back and forth. There's no tracking going on anymore. They're just using their bodies to continue to work through this space. And the last thing, going back to that playful orientation, Sarah's prediction was wrong, but she doesn't seem to be particularly upset about that or defending it. She's really engaged in what made Victor's right. I mean, David's right, excuse me. Hard to continue that pseudonyms with videos. But so that playful orientation seems to be working well in terms of sharing their ideas, being engaged, and generating a lot of reflection. And so you probably can't read this, but when we asked them then to be more formal and articulate the rules that were going on here, they said, I won't read it all, but the part I really like is this piece down here where they say, the forces compromise. The vertical and horizontal bump into each other, and then it will be diagonal. And the reason I like that is it preserves this embodied sense that they were taking a perspective on it, right? The forces compromise, and they bump into each other, right? So even when they're being formal, it's still grounded in the experiences they had as people walking through space. So the formalisms have more meaning and sense to them at the end of this is the hope. And in fact, they were able to do what they were struggling with before in terms of coming up with a way to start to figure out which exact angle it was going to be. They came up with the bossy and nice rule. So the big force is the bossy force, and the nice force is the little force. And it goes a lot in the direction of the bossy force and a little in the direction of the nice force. And that's how they figured out which the exact angle is going to be. So, and again, that preserves that sort of personal perspective on the world. So I want to take you through a second case and go a little bit deeper in how I think the technology is actually adding value and what's going on in kids' learning and to really go a little bit deeper. And to do that, I have to introduce one more idea, and this is an idea from cognitive linguistics called conceptual blends. And in conceptual blends, which Fauconnier and Turner developed, it's the idea that you take one cognitive structure or source domain and you sort of mash it up or laminate it on another one, and you produce a qualitatively new structure that you can reason from. And so I'll give you an example from popular media. This was an infographic that New York Times did about Usain Bolt at the last Olympics.
Was Usain Bolt's gold medal sprint? Let's put him on a slightly bigger stage. See him race against every Olympic medalist since 1896. This imaginary race, assembled using runners' average speeds, reveals just how much faster sprinters have become.
So in this case, then, the first, sort of maybe it's even more than one, the first source domain is this imaginary race, right? All these racers ran against each other, and they never actually ran against each other, but you see them now, and you see him crossing the finish line, and depending on how fast they were, how far they would get in that set amount of time. The second source domain is the bar graph. All right, so they're organized now in the form of a bar graph, and you can start to reason about this from this new context in new ways. You can say, oh, there's a big gap here. Maybe they switched from dirt fields to synthetic fields, and maybe they got some new training technique or some new shoes or something here, right? So you can start to reason about these situations in a slightly different way. I want to give you another example. This is an example from Ed Hutchins. And he calls these material blends. And the reason I wanted to give you this example was because it's a historical example, and it shows that people make these blends on purpose to be able to compute answers in novel and convenient ways. So this takes the compass rose, the 32 points of cardinal direction, and superimposes it over a 24-hour clock. And that divides up the clock into 45-minute segments. It turns out that by happenstance, the difference between high tide each day is 47 minutes because it follows the lunar calendar. And this is important to sailors because if you coming into a port, you kind of want to come in during high tide and not during low tide so you don't run your ship aground or into rocks. So what they do is they can take a port and assign it a cardinal direction west. So you can take San Francisco port and say, we're going to assign it west by southwest. And that means that on the full moon, high tide at San Francisco port is at 4:30. Now, all you have to do if you're coming into San Francisco port some point after is to figure out how many days after the full moon you are, and you count up that many number of steps on the compass. So you're coming in 5 days past the full moon, and you come in and you can say that tonight, high tide at San Francisco is going to be at 8:15. So this is an idea of a computational blend, and it's very material based. So Ed Hutchins calls that a material blend. And I want to introduce one more idea about blends because in pretend play, we're one of the source domains that kids are using is their own body and their own personal perspective on the world. And that's very important to the way we're thinking about things. And that is not just happening in pretend play. And kids, Ellie Oakes did a study of physicists quite some time ago, and she saw this curious thing that sometimes physicists were talking in terms of the first person. I can't figure this out. What I'm trying to say is, and they were using pronouns that referred to them as a scientist. Sometimes they used pronouns in a third person way, right? If this is truly a phase transition line, then this will happen. But sometimes they spoke in these weird sorts of ways that really struck her eye. And they would say things like, when I come down, I'm in the domain state. And these were physicists standing in front of a chalkboard with a graph on it. And they were talking about what they would do if they were walking along that graph. And they were coming down in temperature, and they were coming into a point of a graph that was representing a phase transition or a domain state. So she talked about this as liminal worlds. And we want to think of this as a special class of blends that we're trying to produce are liminal blends. They take the first person embodied experience and laminate it on this material structure of the giant graph paper and the augmented reality of the symbol system and the computer thing to present a new way that you can put these things together in a qualitatively new way that you can reason through physics, biology, other types of systems. So in our case then, we're talking about starting with the embodiment, adding this symbol system over the top so that you can, and like the compass case, we want it to be a computational blend, that the force of 2 predicts a particular change in the speed and direction of the ball, right? So you can compute new answers with it. So it's, and so I want to take you through one more case that happened in our study. And this is a case about learning about friction. And it's an interesting case for us because it was partially successful. Not everything went the way we had hoped, and I'll show that to you. And we think those cases are really instructive because the pieces that went right can be illustrated, but also where it went wrong is very helpful for us to see. And this is going to be the close-up of the screen that's behind them. And so this is a blending of the students as a ball. It actually will turn out that they're pretending to be envelopes. They're walking along this sort of game board that we've set up for them, and they're going to explore some friction spaces and try and figure out what friction does to their motion. Now, friction is a sort of a deceptively simple idea. Even young kids can pretty easily figure out that bumpy surfaces slow things down. That's not particularly kids for even young kids to figure out. But where it gets a little trickier is that we've never experienced no friction. And not only that, the types of experiences that kids, and probably you have, with low friction environments all have to do with going fast, right? So there's slipping and falling, which feels very fast as you're going down. Skiing, ice skating, sledding, right? All of these are associated with going fast. So kids, and so maybe it's not surprising that many kids tend to say when there's no friction, you're going to speed up. And then there's this very subtle distinction. If you envision a ball rolling across a grassy surface and slowing down as it does so, and coming to an icy patch, there's a very subtle distinction between stopping, slowing down, and speeding up. And so that's some of the nuance we were trying to get at with our first and second graders. I'll take you a little deeper. There's 3 stages in blend theory. There is the composition, where you take these things and you map them together. The different source domains get mapped together. And in this case, we're trying to suggest a very particular blend. And that blend is to use the body and map it to this game board we created. All right. So, let me tell you a little bit of backstory, because this lesson was not exactly what we were planning to do. This one kind of emerged from being responsive to the kids. So the kids had recently gone to a field trip to the post office. And so when they came back, they were very excited about the post office, and at recess they were playing post office. And one of the things that excited them most in this post office was this mail machine that shot letters through and stamped them and sorted them and things like that. And so we decided to build on that excitement and their interest and design this game where they are pretending to be an envelope that's being shot through this machine. And depending on which square they land on, something happens. They might get force in the same direction, in an opposite direction, or this new thing might happen that they've never thought about yet, which is they might land on a friction square, right? So we're trying to create a blend that references this game world, but also references their body. And references their body in the sense that they're going to step on a friction surface and be able to feel that surface in a real tactile way. And then the symbol system and the computer simulation that allows you to deal with that simulation in a using mathematics to describe it, right? So if you get one force in the same direction, now you're going at a faster speed or a speed of 2. So, and then there's a second thing, which is then, of course, the computer simulation comes along and provides an alternative blend, perhaps, from the one that you just created. And you can see whether or not your blend predicts the same thing that the computer's blend does. And one last thing I want to say is there's the trouble is going to come because there's two senses of speed being introduced here. In the game context, you have speed as the number of squares you're going to move in a turn. And in the embodied sense, you have the real motion that you're going, real distance over a real time in that embodied sense. And negotiating that is going to be where the trouble pops up in this example. So I just want to give you a heads up there. All right. So here we have our student Marissa, and I don't have enough time to show you how this blend builds up over time in interaction, but it's definitely being co-constructed between kids and in interaction. But when you get to the second stage, that second stage is completion, when they use a blend to make an inference or to compute some answer. And so we can see evidence of blending here. So the researcher says, what speed are you going? And she says 2, 3. So the funny thing is, she says she's going a speed of 2 or 3, but she's standing still. She's not moving at the time. So we know she's referencing that game board sort of metaphor, right? But she is positioned on the material floor, and that's referencing that game board. And so the interaction goes on. So you're going 2, and then you're going 3 because, well, first I had to, and then I landed on, or then you landed on, right? So landing here, you can see that the researcher, too, is referencing these types of blends and helping to build up this blend and use it to make an answer. And we see it being used in sort of computational ways. She looks back to see what it was before. She originally had a 2, and she taps her foot on the one she's on now, and that's a 1, and you get 2 plus 1 is 3, and she sort of can do this answer. So then what happens is she takes her 3 steps and she lands on a new square, and she happens to land on the linoleum. And this is the first time that friction enters in. So up until this point, things were going great. She was using the blends that we thought she wanted to, and that everything was fine. But she slips a little bit when she hits the linoleum because she's wearing socks. And so the slips, she's starting to try and build in her real experience about the speed into this blend with the computer simulation, right? And she says, I'm slipping. And so when she's then asked to talk about what happens, there's the third stage of blend theory, which is this elaboration, where then after you've used a completed blend once, you can elaborate it and keep on adding new resources in. And so she reasons then from this slipping experience based on where she is now, that friction is going to make her go faster. And she says, because if there's a 3 and I'm going very fast, I'd land on this and it'd be slippery. So actually, this is where I need to turn down the lights really quick. So apologize for the terrible video quality, but this is a camera zooming in on the public display behind them. So it's a picture of a picture, which is never a good thing to show. But I want to show you, so next what happens then is that they run the computer simulation, and she sees what the computer is. And so you'll see the ball rolling across here. The friction is different surfaces are represented there. I'll just play this for a second. So you can see the ball rolls, it hits the linoleum square. You can turn the lights back on. And slows down and then hits this carpet square and eventually comes to a stop. My favorite part of this video is that she ducks so she's not hit in the head by the virtual ball. She notices then that the computer simulation has a different prediction than hers, and she works to incorporate this into a new explanation. And so what she does, she says, if I go on this, and she walks to stand on the linoleum square again, so she's still using her body to work through these things, I could slip, right? And she does that slipping motion she was doing before. And then I'd fall, and then it would make me go slower because I would slip. So she's hierarchically sort of combined these different notions of speed, saying the slippery surface would make me go faster, but I would slip and fall, and that fall would make me go slower, and that's what the computer simulation must have been attending to. So it was a interesting way to combine these things, and it was interesting to us in that she may have been picking up on the fact that we were really trying to privilege this embodied way of reasoning, and she's honoring her embodied sense of this way of making sense of this, and honoring that in the way in which she's making this final blend. It's not the end of her story or the end of this story, but I think it's as far as we're going to get to today. And I should note, actually, that this was, well, I said it was a partially successful unit. It's probably the least successful unit that we had was dealing with friction, which was surprising because we went in with it thinking it was deceptively simple. But still, 40% of our kids were able to get a higher score on our friction questions than before. In summary then today, I just want to say we're talking about trying to create a representational infrastructure or a technological infrastructure that starts with pretend play and helps us build on that and transition from pretend play, this early competence that kids have, towards scientific modeling. And we want to build on this creative and safe place that comes with play, this orientation towards that activity, the focus in on inquiry into a set of rules, and the social aspects of it, the negotiation and the social negotiation and reflection on these rules. And we want it to end with scientific modeling. And in fact, kind of one of the curious things is we're trying to come up with solutions that design out. By the end, we want kids not to have to use the technology to reason about physics. We don't want them to have to dance their dissertations, or we don't want to, every time they have to ask a physics problem, we don't want them to have to get up, move around, start up an augmented reality world. We want them to transition so they can use the symbol systems and canonical procedures of science and concepts of science, but we want them to do so that's a way that's grounded in meaningful experience so that they can make sense of those things, right? And then just I can't emphasize enough for my view on technology that this technology is not teaching anything, right? For us, for me and our research group, technology is always used, as Tobin said in the very beginning, to spark conversations and to give children and their teachers the resources to move those conversations in productive ways and learn the material. It's all happening through social interaction, and that the computer is just a context and a set of resources that help those social interactions function. So I'm currently redesigning this system in the NSF grant, and so my ideas are back in design and thinking about design principles. There was recently an article in the Educational Researcher about design principles for designing augmented reality. And I think the data I showed today in our experience would allow us to amend some of those principles that Lindberg and Johnson Glenberg promoted. And the first one is that, I think they would agree that you don't want to just use generalized motion. It's not just that they're up and moving that's enhancing learning, right? We're not just sitting kids on a treadmill and having them listen to a lecture, which you actually do get learning gains from. Memory is enhanced just by the act of moving, but it's not that generalized embodiment and generalized motion that we think is doing the work here. Now, they would say that they assert that you should use the body in a specific way, and that it should be in what they call action concept congruencies, which means basically if you're reasoning about a pendulum swing, that you should have kids moving their bodies in ways that is analog to that pendulum swing. And we think that that's fine and that's great, but we think our work in liminal blends provides a new way to think about, that kind of expands that repertoire, and you can start to think about using the body in ways that are more symbolic and less tied to being an analog to the physical motion that they would experience in the world. They talk about augmentation should augur well, which they mean add value above and beyond some other type of environment. And I think that's fine. And I think the amendment or the addition to that we're thinking about is you really want to think about the activity that kids are engaging in, and the way that what counts as adding value is really tied to the creating a coherent activity that engages the technology in smart ways and engages social aspects in smart ways. And I haven't had a lot of chance to talk about the classroom culture and the other aspects of the environment that went into this. But we do, and we think play is a really good way to ground augmented reality for young children. And then, again, like what I was just saying a minute ago, they and we agree that you really need to make these augmented realities not a one-on-one experience with the computer, but they need to be public and open and collaborative. And there we're in complete agreement. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know it's a difficult sort of thing to wrap your head around, and hopefully the videos and things help. It's one of the hardest things is to convey what these activities look like, especially when you're doing so in text and things. So thank you for bearing with me.
So what do the kids think they're up to? Like, how is this framed for the kids? Like, what? So you framed it as play, but did the kids frame it as play? And how is the structure of the classroom coming together around these moments where they're using the board? And so I'm just trying to.
Yeah. So I don't know that.
What's their purpose for engaging in this activity?
So I think that goes. There's two answers. One is I don't think we did enough in our first endeavors to set this up as play and as a sort of trajectory of play, and we're working really hard to do that in this next time. So in this next round, we want kids to engage in the system with just free play, right? So all we'll do is we're doing states of matter right now, and so we say draw your characters, because we don't design the artwork here. The artwork in the system is all kid artwork, which is why it looks kind of. So we don't do anything fancy with wire models and anything. It's all just two-dimensional kids draws. We scan them in and throw them up. So we're just saying, have 10 minutes and play. All we're saying is it has to involve ice in some ways. And we'll get some, ice princess or knock down the ice walls. We don't know exactly what. But we want to start off with a strong, I guess, strong orientation to set up this whole thing that this is play the whole way through. We didn't do that in the last thing. The way we did it in the last trial was I was really moved towards thinking about this as a science classroom and a collective science classroom. So they were really coming up with a set of rules that they collectively agreed upon represented things, and then they move on to the next thing. And so that was with all the artwork being their own artwork. They had to choose how to represent force and how to represent speed in the system. So in the friction example, you saw that friction was just represented as a tile, like a piece of carpet. That was because they hadn't invented a symbol for friction yet. Once they invented a symbol for friction, then we used friction symbols that they invented, right? And they invented several different ones, and then kids argued why theirs was the best, right? So there was sticky hands, was the symbols, and things like that. With the arrows for force, the first one they did was a kapow, like a explosion symbol, and so they forgot to put in direction. So all of a sudden, then they're doing the computer simulation, the ball's going off in some random direction. They just thought about force as bigger or little, and they didn't think about the direction of it. So they amended their symbol to be that. So we thought of it much as this sort of community of scientists that were developing a symbol system and a way of making predictions about what was going to happen in that computer. So it wasn't as playful as we wanted it to, but it was much more geared towards maybe more traditional ideas about inquiry.
It's kind of a follow-up to that, but so is part of what you're saying that you started by framing it as the improv kind of thing, where there's some constraints? Is part of what you're saying you're moving to relax some of the improv? Because in the friction example, right, like part of the constraint is the kids are supposed to pretend to be this ball, but it seems like this one girl is not playing that way, right? She's playing as a person slipping on a thing, which creates a whole different set of scenarios. And so I guess what I'm asking is part of the relaxation of that to say, well, maybe we could just explore that phenomenon physically instead of staying within the frame of we are balls? Or can you say more about like that constraint issue?
Yeah, I think what we're thinking about is it's still very much improv. I mean, even just play something with ice is a classic sort of improv thing. There's this saying that somebody told me that does theater that improv is you have to accept the duck. So if somebody hands you a duck, you have to incorporate that into your skit, right? You can't just ignore the duck. And so we're very much about thinking about what's the right duck to start with and how to add more ducks. So I don't think we're trying to get away from improv, but we are trying to start much looser and not jump right into the mail machine game where she has to be an envelope.
Duck, I guess what I'm trying to ask. So is it to get them to get engaged in a particular phenomenon, or just to get them to engage in some phenomenon about ice, and then once we have something that we've all agreed upon about ice, then we can explore it? Like which of those two?
Yeah, so it's to give some handles towards what a teacher might do. I'm not sure you can read this, right? So when we think about how the teacher can engage them and try and move this play in productive ways so that they actually learn the science. That's the trick, right? Is we need to move this science along, and using play in science instruction is not a new idea, but in previous work and work without technology, the problem comes is that the teacher either sort of over-mediates the play and tries to push it along, or doesn't engage with them as a play partner, and it doesn't move in a productive direction. And so we're trying to walk that line, and the improv idea is our way to walk that line and give teachers a way in to engage with kids as play partners and like add a new element or a new context, or to ask about what the consequences are of a particular choice that they've made in their free play, and then play out that scenario. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Oh, Harold.
Well,
Go.
I guess from a kid's, I guess even at this age, kids have the beginnings, or maybe more than just beginnings, of right and wrong. There's a right answer, there's a wrong answer. So how do you, because this is really about the experience of, it's about modeling, it's about using the body, you're using your body to mimic forces that you're now seeing in this augmented reality. How do you disabuse them that this is not just about right and wrong, even though there is a right answer to this question of force?
Right.
Do they come in, even at this age, with an idea that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and that's really what the teacher's asking me to find? And that actually gets in the way of them being able to experiment in the way that you're...
No, so I mean, it's a funny thing too. I mean, we're constantly surprised about sometimes the trust that they put in the computer simulation, and sometimes the way in which kids challenge the computer simulation. So it's not uniform, right? Some kids just don't believe that the computer is doing it right, and they will challenge it, and they will, and they even challenge the teacher. I remember when we were doing an experiment with trying to show inertia, that the motion goes even after the push is done. And so the teacher was trying to push kids across the room in a chair and say, here's the push ended. They were really debating and looking closely about things. And I don't know if it's this sort of playful sort of thing where they can negotiate the rules, or maybe it's something in the classroom culture. And this is a progressive school with some strong Reggio flavors. They've been, for the last 2 years at this school before we got a hold of them, expressing their own ideas about things in different ways. So when they were doing friction, they were making tissue paper models of different friction surfaces which led to that different bumpy symbol, right? And they were making different pictures. We engage them in this whole process of modeling and engaging in art, producing the artwork. So they're coming up with their own versions of how do you represent speed. So I just don't know. I haven't seen them. They're really engaged and bought into this sort of modeling. I mean, maybe they know that there's a right answer at the end, but it seems like they're committed to producing their understanding of what that thing is and not just discovering what the thing is.
Although they are testing that against what they see.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, so that's good, but it depends on what value they put on the actual test, right? In terms of of giving credit to themselves for their own understanding.
Right. And the collective piece, right? So they're working as a group. So they have to, if they decide that lines and the number of lines is how they want to represent speed, which is what they ended up doing, they have to agree to it and debate whether or not that's the best way to do it. And different kids will have different ideas about the representation of that and the model of it, not necessarily the right answer about the phenomenon of it. I'm not sure if I've satisfied you with that answer. Right.
So I'm wondering, you started the talk with showing some kind of gains that the students had. Mm-hmm. And then I remember you saying something about the questions you asked. So how did you look at what gains they had? What were your measures? Did you talk to them? Did you have them do something paper and pencil? These are first and second graders?
Yeah, so they were interviews, one-on-one. If you really want to know what a first grader says, you don't give them a written test or a written test, right? They can read and write, but they won't write very much for you. So these were interviews. Some of them were like the one item I showed you. A lot of them were scenarios where we gave them like balls, like the one I said about the friction, where a ball's rolling across the grass, and we'd have a ball, and they'd move it with their hand, and as much as what they were saying, we were videotaping how they moved the ball across the grass. And then we said, okay, now we put it down a piece of paper with a hockey ring on it. So now comes to an icy patch. What happens? And they would move it on, and they would draw these really crazy paths. So it was an interactive interview. We treated that interview like a test. We tried to code it. We had to drop a few items because we didn't quite get intercoder reliability on 3 items. But we had 16 items that we ended up with good intercoder reliability. And so we treated that as a pre and post test. We asked it before and after.
How much do you think was a result of, it seems like you have lots of things happening at the same time.
Right.
So you can't really pinpoint anything.
No, I mean, I try to make a case qualitatively that the technology is playing some role. I can't pinpoint it. Certainly don't even think it's the only role. I mean, we don't want to give up the hands-on experiments. But looking at the order of things, and we haven't necessarily done enough of seeing different kids who go through different activities in different orders even to look at that. In this case, we saw that the physical experimentation got them so far, and engaging in another way got them to another point, and then our activities did something else. But no, I mean, I can't make any strong claims that it's the technology. It's this whole environment, right? I mean, it's the classroom culture about representing things and engaging in modeling as much as anything else. So I'm not trying to make any particular claims for that the computer or the augmented reality did exactly this, but it seemed to be a productive part of this overall environment we asked them to engage in. So, Cynthia?
Sort of building on Harlan's and Kari's question, but So you talked about outcomes in terms of the correctness of their understanding of certain kinds of physics concepts and how much this changed, etc. Right? But there are first and second graders, and I wonder to what extent it seems like your environment, all the various different features you've got going on there, also seems like it's really could be really effective at building certain kinds of scientific disposition, right? Like sometimes the world does not entirely consist just of what you see. There are these, invisible things, whether they're forces or material or whatever it is, right? And that sometimes we think about experience in terms of our embodied concrete realities, and other times we reason about it with symbol systems and projections and abstractions, and right. So to what extent might you also be looking at ways in which you see kids sort of moving back and forth between these more concrete and more abstract kinds of reasonings and thinking about things that take experience beyond just what you see, or kinds of inquiry that you see kids engaging in, right? Are those also kinds of results, and if so, what are you doing to get at those?
That's a really good question. I don't know that we have gotten at them. I mean, we've certainly seen different orientations come in contact with each other. So in the friction example, there was another kid that was so thinking about this process so abstractly that he said, if you have you're going at a speed of 2, and you hit the big carpet, which is the highest friction level, it's a friction level of 3, that 3 minus 2 minus 3 is going to end up with 1 left over in the other direction, and so the ball should roll backwards, right? So he was so approaching this in such an abstract and logical way that he actually got the opposite sort of problem that Marissa was running into. She was approaching it in this very sort of embodied way about slipping and I'm going to speed up, and he was approaching it in a very abstract way. And so, if I played that clip, they're actually in contact with each other and saying, no, I think it's going to be this way, and I think it's going to be this way, and why do you think that? So you see those different sort of worldviews come in contact and have to deal with each other.
It just seems like with that 6 to 8-year-olds, part of what you're trying to do is shape habits of mind and epistemologies and orientations to knowledge and inquiry in the world, not just how accurate is your understanding of friction.
Right. Yeah, and so we're trying, we think of it as scientific modeling. We're trying to foster scientific modeling, but we didn't come up with a good measure of just a scientific modeling test. And so I think that's one of the things that we want to do moving forward. We also want to...
Yeah. Right, like seeing what they're talking about and how the kinds of shifts they're doing.
Right. And we're doing some comparisons in this next round. So we're setting this up. We're going to design variations of the environment. So one that looks like play in what we think is going on, and then we're going to set up one that's more like a video game. We've been purposely trying to avoid making this like a Wii video game, but we want to compare it to because that preserves the first body ness of it, right? So it'll be a same motion tracking service, but now it's in the service of a video game. And we think that that'll have different affordances for the type of reflective activity. So if you think about kids playing video games, we think that they do a lot of planning beforehand and a lot of post-mortem afterwards, but we don't think we'll see the same type of reflection during the activity, the negotiation of the rules and the debate back and forth, right? So when kids get engaged in video gaming, our experience is that they get very focused in on achieving some end and optimizing their performance within the moment towards that end. Kind of like engineering sort of stuff that Leona Schabel talked about, the engineering mindset that often gets in the way of inquiry because you're trying to make that ball roll down that ramp as fast as you can, and so you're not necessarily reflecting on everything about it. So we're setting up a contrast with the first personness of it, but without the play part to start to do a contrast to see if it's the play and not the embodiment that works. And then we want to contrast it with more third-person desktop versions of it, so that you have another version that removes the embodiment of it, but still does scientific modeling. So we'll have a modeling environment that's a desktop third-person modeling environment. So with those sets of contrasts, we think we can start to tease apart what exactly is contributing and what sort of mindset really makes it work. Lee, did you have a question?
I did, but then I've been thinking about it. I feel like maybe I'm just confused. The question I was going to ask is getting really kind of back to questions before. Like, I just wonder how you framed what the computer was doing, like the correctness of it, and sort of what you told the kids what the computer was. The reason I was curious about this is that I was thinking about whether if the computer is just in pretend play, you said there are no wrong answers, but like, is the computer the right answer? And if so, does that kind of break the rules of improv that one player is always right? But then I realized that it's probably wrong to think about the computer as a player, because the game is really generating explanations, and the computer is more like the phenomenon itself. And so that's why, which is probably a better way of framing it than how I was thinking of it in the first place. So.
Yeah, and y'all are making me think we need to do a better, more conscious job. So we did not frame the computer sort of one way or another, right? If you listen to that first clip I showed you of the ball rolling in 2 dimensions, so now let's find out what the computer says. And that was pretty much. It was privileged, but it wasn't. We didn't say this is the right answer. We just said we should figure out what the computer says. And it's kind of funny that one kid. David had this elaborate idea of the smart boards were smart, and he was always drawing pictures of like a robot smart board, because it was projected onto a smart board. So he had this elaborate fantasy about the smart board.
Did you ever change it up and not have the computer be correct, and then you have the students reason with that?
Yeah. So I haven't done that.
I'm just afraid that technology is always correct.
Yeah, so I mean, Barbara White's done some work with middle school kids where she gave them the ability to make the simulation act according to their rules, no matter what the rules were. Yeah, so you can program it. In this early version, the physics engine was just a physics engine. We didn't have any flexibility.
Maybe that's 5th or 6th grade.
Yeah, well, I mean.
So we're here.
Yeah, she was working with middle school, 6th and 7th graders actually. But we have not tried that, but it would be interesting, and other people have shown that it is productive to be able to see what it looks like with the rules that they make. I mean, the only way we do that is in this play context where the puppet show, where they can make the ball go at whatever speed and whatever direction they want by acting that out. In this context, in the experiment we showed you, those were always in this inquiry frame, so it was this embodied prediction frame. But as we think about a series of play activities, I think we're loosening that up a little bit more, and maybe it might not be. So we're trying. I don't know if we're going to break. I have to think about the relationship between play and more formal inquiry, and how that fits with modeling, because we know we want play on a trajectory to modeling, but I'm not sure how inquiry, the strong version of sort of school inquiry, fits in with there.
It seems like forces and mechanics might lend itself pretty well to like an embodied approach. Have you thought about how this might extend to more abstract or general physics concepts? So
that's what we're doing with the new grant as well. We're trying it. We want to stretch it until it breaks. So we're going to try. And actually, physics was not the best one to do. So we're going to try complex biological systems, sort of pollination systems in bees. Joshua Danish did his dissertation on studying bees, and so we're going to do that context as well. And we're doing states of matter. So we only think this is a good fit for places where they can take on the roles of agents within a system. Right? Even if those agents are not alive. They're molecules or things like that. We're designing for larger scale spaces and multiple people because we want this to be a collective sort of activity. And so that's actually why the physics stuff was not, we're moving away from the physics because it's not actually the juiciest role, right? So the kid that got to be the ball was happy, but the kid who was standing there being friction and waiting for the ball to roll by so he can grab them, didn't keep that person engaged for a long period of time. So we're really looking, if we want to design for schools and for larger groups of kids, we got to think about the right content that's going to be able to engage 8 to 12, and we're really aiming for like 12, so we could divide up half the class and engage them in one of these activities. And so it has to have enough roles that'll keep those kids engaged, because when they weren't engaged, little kids kind of just wander off and you lose them. So we wanted to try a physical system and a biological system to see how it played out differently, but we're also trying to design a platform that we can keep on seeing, does it work for math, does it work for statistics, does it work for other things as well. Did you have a follow-up question? Or?
Yeah, actually, so how do you think about is there a distinction between embodiment versus like perspective taking? I mean, like in a lot of times you might give an explanation for some physics thing, like the electron wants to go downhill or something like that's a perspective, but it's not necessarily embodied. Is there, like, how do you think about the relationship between that?
Well, I mean, the third person perspective is obviously different, but I think you're thinking about that first person perspective. So I think there is a difference, although embodiment kind of comes with that first person perspective, but I think you can take that first person perspective without actually acting it out and use embodied resources and things. And I think the embodiment does add new resources to work with. So if you think about, and this is purely speculation, but think about David's prediction where he walked to that first thing and took a step out and was trying to figure out, using his arm swing to figure out what angle he was going to run off with, right? So the common intuition is that, or misconception is that it's going to go in the direction of the last hit. I mean, if you think about swinging your arm, starting from where your inertia is to out, that's about as far back as I can get my arm to go. That's the most extreme motion I can make it move. So if you don't think that that's the most extreme angle, then you'd probably want to come up with something, right? So the limitations of the body start to enter in strange ways, or ways I haven't thought fully through, to add new resources to try and reason your way through making a prediction. So I think the first person, you can certainly divorce the perspective from the embodiment, but I think when you're taking that embodied perspective, you get that first person perspective in there.
So I'm not a science educator. I'm an amateur science educator that works with this project that we have many people representing here, that we're working with local teachers to understand science instruction and math instruction. So one of the things in the next generation science standards is about data. And so where is the data? And so one of our groups is really into data and what data should kids be looking at and how should they be grappling with data. So what would you say the data is that the kids are grappling with in this scenario?
Right, so I focus exclusively on models, and the data that you hold your model accountable to is really this simulation in the context we have now, right? So you create your prediction based on your current understanding of how things work, and then you test that against the data that's produced by the simulation. And when you add in that you've marked up the floor like graph paper, you can start to do things like count how far it went up and how far it went over, or pause it and start to look at how far did it go in 1 second and things like that. So there's ways in which you can produce data from those simulations and measure things, and we're starting to think about what are the set of annotation tools that we need to add in to do more of that, to make it something that you can go another layer with and produce hard data from, the type you're talking about. But right now, the data is the lived experience of seeing that simulation do something.
So are kids doing science then? If they're Mary's in the data.
Yeah, they are, that little bit.
It's just to be.
So tell me more.
Right? I mean, and
I'm trying,
observation.
I'm acting like a teacher, and you're asking me to have kids reason with data, and this seems like sort of act backwards to what a lot of our teachers have come up with, which is you sort of start with the data and you try to develop your model from the data rather than having, sort of experiencing the phenomena and then seeing whether or not your sort of the concept seems to be coming first and the data seems to be coming second. And
You're creating the data.
Data isn't necessarily limited to either inductive or deductive reasoning, right? I mean, it's sort of, you can have data that arises out of experience. And then if you're doing this shift back and forth between the concrete experience and the abstraction, right? What perspective you would have on that experiential data would be different. Right? I'm looking at it as, this is the experience I had, versus I'm in that case literally stepping out of that embodied perspective. Right? For a broad reflective kind of. I don't think data has to be big data.
Yeah, and there's different types of data. I mean, like, not every science topic is going to be producing the same type of data, and certainly not experimental data, right? Think about evolution. The type of data you would need to test is not experimental data, but observational data, right? And so, in that sense, that's producing data from observations of a system, much like they would be producing data from observing the simulation here. So I don't think there's just one type of data. But yeah, I think certainly we didn't provide enough tools to make the type of data that teachers might be looking for. But we weren't quite there and aiming for that yet, I think.
I want to think more about the model and where the model kind of lives in this arrangement. And one of the things that's kind of interesting to me is that it seems like one place it can live is really in the embodied prediction itself. It's kind of like that anecdote about the dog who knows calculus, like running into the water to get the frisbee or something. And you can kind of have a sense for how a ball would react, and that the model is implicit in your embodied sense of what would happen versus explicit, like I know that forces add, the vectors add in this way. So I'm just kind of curious, like to what extent either of those is a goal of this. Like how much is the explicit model?
So the explicit model for us is definitely the goal.
So
right?
Going back to Carrie's question then, so the kinds of like simulation-y, prediction-y things, is that what you were saying about not knowing what underlies that? Like it could be just an embodied sense versus are you trying to assess, I guess, the explicit models in some way?
I'm not sure I quite understand. Are we trying to assess the explicit models that the kids?
Solve a problem about like how a ball is going to behave.
Right.
Like there's two ways that they can answer that question, just based on some embodied intuition, or based on like, well, I know that the forces are going to add. And so, are you trying to disentangle that?
So we were looking carefully in our like interviews before and after with how they answered the question and trying to devise different scenarios that might tease them apart in terms of what the model would be. And there's a lot known about different physics is one of the reasons we started with physics is there's been so much work there that we could have a pretty good idea of the different ways that kids would be reasoning about things, and we could start to design things to tease them out, right? So there's a lot of work around friction, and there's a lot of work around two-dimensional motion and net force and things like that. So we were very interested in exactly how they were reasoning about things. So that I don't think that comes out with the sort of pre-post right wrong kind of thing, but that's definitely in that data, and mostly so far we've looked at it in terms of the rules that they formalized at the end, like the bossy and nice rule and the compromise rule, right? That's where we see them in their own words articulate the rules rather than some more formal version that we produce for them.
On the explicit model, but this data is making me think about maybe there's the implicit model could even stick in a more salient way and could be an interesting outcome in a way almost. next, or a precursor to that other thing. And so it might be something worth looking for as an outcome in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something in there that's worth looking. I mean, the people who are studying body cognition, I mean, that they have a strong position that that's the way that the brain evolved for thousands and thousands of years, and so building on that sort of natural capability is important. But in terms of connecting to teachers and connecting to classrooms and curriculum, that certainly leaving it at that implicit understanding would be, I think, a tough sell if you wanted to work with teachers and connect to science standards and curriculum, right? So.
I think we're about done, so
Okay.
don't go too far.
Okay.
I'm, in case you don't know who I am, I'm Harold Levine, and I'm Dean of the School of Ed, and it's my great pleasure to be able to wrap this all up and to thank Noel and all of you for coming. As many of you know, I'm an anthropologist by training, and one of the things that we studied was liminality. And of course, for an anthropologist, it's in the context of typically religious ritual, rite de passage. It's a very powerful state. It's an in-between state, right? So judging by my response and those of you out there, I think we're all in a deep in-between state, for me at least, between what I thought I knew and what I think is possible to know. And I think Noel has helped me to get to that place, because it's a very, as I said, it's a very powerful state. And out of that comes, I think, tremendous learning about yourself, but also the phenomenon in question. So, and you know, he's made me think today about science education, about the role of technology in education, and I think a lot of us have been sold a bill of goods about that from the manufacturers of technology, and the value of play in a child's learning. So I think all of us, and me in particular, owe you a debt of gratitude for your talk. It was very stimulating. We thank you for coming. This is a little gift from us. UC Davis does a lot of things, including makes its own olive oil. So
thank you.
This is a state-grown olive oil here, and it's like making lemonade from lemons, right? They had all these useless olives, and somebody said, let's create olive oil. So that's what they did. I realize you're probably on a plane. Probably this is more than 3 ounces. So either we can swing it at dinner, or we can ship it for you. Anyway, thank you, Noel, for being here today.
Thank you very much.